Welcome, everyone, to the Friday the 13th edition of Legal Tech Week, the show where we talk about the top stories in legal tech and innovation over the past week and whatever else suits our fancy. I'm Bob Ambrogi. I am the host of this show, and I also have a blog called Law Sites and a podcast called Law Next. And let's see, from my upper left, Steve, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I am Steve Embry. I have the blog Tech Law Crossroads about legal technology and innovation. And I am also chair of the ABA Law Practice Division this year.
Awesome. Which, by the way, today is the last day to get your applications in for Startup Alley at ABA Tech Show.
Yep.
Closing the applications today. Joe.
I am Joe Patrice from Above the Law. I am not all that good at legal tech, but I am staying in a Holiday Inn Express right now. So that, if anyone remembers that commercial. So I'm on the road, but I was able to get an early check-in, so I'm able to join us today.
And apparently the Wi-Fi even works.
It does. It's actually kind of nice.
And all the way from the UK, Caroline.
Caroline Hill. I'm editor-in-chief of Legal IT Insider, based in the UK, but we've got a global audience talking about all things legal tech.
Right. And all the way from upstate New York, Niki Black.
Such an exotic location. My name is Niki Black. I am the head of SME and external education at MyCase/LawPay/AffiniPay. And I write legal tech columns for ABA Journal, Above the Law, Daily Record, and sometimes other outlets as well. And I also oversee the MyCase LawPay reports. We do benchmark reports, and we do a legal industry report every year, and I help draft those and write them.
And in your spare time, you send interesting queries to ChatGPT.
That's right. I'm obsessed.
And Jean O'Grady.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jean O'Grady. I am the author and editor of Do We Be Strategic, which covers legal I used to be able to speak. Legal information and knowledge management and any other interesting technology-related developments in the legal space. And I also write for Legal Tech Hub.
And now we're firing ChatGPT from writing your cue cards after that.
Thank you.
And somebody else who's been known to chat with ChatGPT, Stephanie Wilkins.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Wilkins, editor-in-chief of Legal Tech News at ALM, and a big fan of ChatGPT.
All right, well, we thought we'd start this week, since this is a show about legal tech, with something that has absolutely nothing to do with legal tech, or maybe it does. And we're going to have Steve Embry tell us whether it does, but he's just back from the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. And what happened? What was it like?
Well, maybe I should put my hoodie on so I could sort of get in with the motif of the show. But the Consumer Electronics Show, it's actually called CES. Branding thing, but it is the preeminent global consumer tech show. Attendance probably over 100,000, 2,200 square feet of exhibits. It occupies the entire city of Las Vegas for about a week. Some observations. Number one, it looks like conferences are back. From all indications, and I don't have a head count, of course, but it sure looked like the shows that they used to have, a couple, 3 years ago. This was the first not totally live. They had one last year, but it was sort of subdued given the pandemic. But this year, it was everywhere. People were everywhere. Exhibits were everywhere. Sessions were everywhere. Parties were everywhere. I would like to say that I could count the number of people wearing masks on two hands because they weren't many, including, people that you typically would think would be wearing masks. A lot of people from the Far East attend, a lot of people from China attend, and there were precious few masks. And I have to say, there were a couple of times when I was on buses going from one venue to the other, or on the famous Las Vegas monorail, when I was crammed in the seat and the whole thing was crowded. And I was thinking, I don't know if this is such a good idea or not. But I'm back. I'm not, knock on wood, I'm not sick. It's before we started, Caroline asked me, why do I go to this? And I try to go every year. I didn't go last year, but I think a lot of times the consumer products end up sort of driving a lot of things legal. Smartphones, the cloud, mobile computing, artificial intelligence. All these things are kind of evident at the consumer realm, and it's nice to see, what people are up to. A lot of products that they show at this thing never come to pass in exactly the same fashion as they show. But some iterations and adaptations of them, ultimately do. One of the things I really like to do at the show is go to something called Eureka Park, which is where all the startups are. It's in a basement of one of the convention centers, and it's just, it's packed with exhibits. One of the really cool things I saw there, by the way, was a lot of countries bring their sort of their technological departments there. You have French tech and you have Italy tech, and tucked in between several of those was the Ukraine with maybe 10 or 15 exhibits, and it kind of made me feel good that they were there, they were in force, and they were smiling and optimistic. And the other thing I like about the show is the mindset of the people there. We go to legal shows, all of us, and sort of see the same people saying the same things over and over again. And then you see not anybody on this round table, but often you see articles by lawyers poo-pooing this technology or that technology, and it won't work. And it's, oh my God, it's got ethical ramifications, and oh my God, the sky is falling. And then you go out to the CES and you see people pushing the envelope and wanting to do new and different things, and it's just full of possibility. So it's exciting. What did I see this year that really caught my eye? Med tech is really booming. Lots of things to take out the friction of experiences with doctors and the medical profession, home monitoring, telemedicine, all those things. And to me, that was interesting because, I think more and more people are going to be accustomed to that kind of experience, and are going to think, why can't I have similar kind of experiences with lawyers? Why do they make it so hard to see them, to talk to them, to understand them, to get paid, to pay them? So that, I think it's an interesting development. One of the more interesting specific products I saw, though, was these two guys have created an artificial intelligence platform which they claim will ferret out algorithmic bias, which could be used by lenders, the criminal justice system, what have you. So it's like an algorithm to check the algorithm, I guess. But I thought it was pretty cool that, if it would really do it. I told the guy, I said, I don't know if your product's going to go anyplace, but you probably have one hell of a career as an expert witness. And he said, yeah, I've actually not thought of that. And yeah, I think you're right. So I said,
I should say, Stephen, when I said, why did you go? It was like, why did you go there? Why did you go? Like, I just wanted to, the emphasis was a little different. I can see it. It sounds interesting. I've not been.
Yeah.
Somebody's asking if you remember the name of that company that whose algorithm checks for algorithmic bias. Do you remember the name of that company?
Yeah, I don't have it off the top of my head, but I'll look it up for you. But yeah, it was pretty cool. He's a pretty interesting guy. The other guy that was pretty interesting is, he had this little, he called it a pill, but you swallow it. It's about the size of a thimble, maybe a little smaller than that. and it has LED lights on it, and it's connected via Bluetooth, and it can swim around in your stomach, and the doctor can control it and look for things and all that. And so he threatens the industry of endoscopic examinations, I guess. But and he claimed, I've swallowed 20 of these, it's no big deal. Finally, somebody said, well, like, what would happen if the thing disintegrated in your system? And he said, very bad. Could be like fatal. I said, okay, I guess we'll wait on that one a bit before I swallow one of those.
Does he sell those outside of clubs as well?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Sounds like my kids on a Friday night. What do we do with our LED lights this time?
Yeah.
Just those two products together, it just makes me think like the red pill from Matrix somehow. And then also this idea that the algorithm's checking the algorithm, but who's going to make sure that the algorithms doing the checking isn't biased? Right. You end up like in this sort of circular, it gets kind of ridiculous. You're going down.
But it did occur to me in talking to him and other people that, a lot of the technology that they're coming up with and already have is sort of changing litigation and the issues in litigation. There are robots and drones that can very easily check for the potential of failure in water pipes or gas pipes, which is a big source of litigation. And workplace safety is being enhanced and improved by all sorts of devices, and the artificial and metaverse training programs that they have. And so you may have a whole piece of litigation that will diminish over time, but in its place will be all these new and different issues that we haven't even thought through, and we're going to try to cram into an existing judicial jurisprudence system that's been in existence forever. And it's sort of like the issue about Uber drivers. Are they employees or are they independent contractors? And I remember the comment of the federal district court judge handling the case and saying, well, they don't quite fit into either. I wish we could just make a new category for these people and what they really are. And so it's kind of interesting to go out there and see all this stuff and think what's it going to mean, in another year or 2 years or 5 years. So it's always fun. I always come back tired, but I'm thankful I didn't come back sick.
That whole new category thing, those of you who were at Clio might have heard me talking about this because for some reason it kept coming up at ClioCon. But the whole idea of what do you do with these things and new category is interesting. The reason I'm in a Holiday Inn Express is because I'm at the Naval Academy for a debate tournament. And our whole argument all year is about what do you do with algorithms that commit torts by the way in which they operate? Is it the fault of the person who programmed it? Maybe, or maybe it's actually the fault of the person who programmed it full of garbage data. How does that work? And it's weird. There's actually some really good literature about ways in which you might want to create an insurance regime that deals with that and creates pools of constantly filled with different people along the supply chain and spreading risk. There's really interesting academic work happening about how to deal with these new situations, cars and medical. Obviously, medical malpractice with a drone is going to be a thing too. I didn't know how much had been written by folks about that until I started having to research it for this purpose.
Well, if only you had a robot lawyer to defend you in court if you had that kind of a case.
What one more interesting thing before I forget it.
That's a segue.
That they highlighted in one of the media.
Steve's not going to let the segue go, though.
Was the use of artificial platforms for cybersecurity purposes, so that it would depend less on humans catching the phishing scam and being diligent, and more on a program, artificial or a computer program to do that. And boy, there's every profession that needed that. It's the legal one. So I hope they're able to accomplish that.
Yeah. Well, so basically what's coming out of CES, or at least your perspective on it, is let's let the robots and the AI oversee all of the issues that we don't want to deal with, like cybersecurity. And this is why I welcome robots every day on Twitter, because you've got to be on their side, the robot overlords. Because if we're going to start handing all this critical stuff off to them, you better be friends with them when they take over. So I think everyone else.
Well, but there are no robots on Twitter anymore because Elon Musk has gotten rid of all of that in his grand reform that is going so well.
Well, I'm not welcoming the Twitter robots. I'm welcoming the actual robots that are going to take over. I'm just using Twitter as my form of, communication.
Yeah, I mean, you guys can make fun of Niki and me all you want, but we're going to be the ones that the robots like when they come.
Right?
Fair enough.
Oh, we're not making it. We're all there with ChatGPT, I think. But speaking of robots, let's try again on bringing up this story. There was a story in the news. I don't know who was going to take it. Joe, did you want to take it in terms of talking about a robot lawyer going to court, possibly in a very big way?
Well, no. So we did. We already talked. I think it was last week. We had the conversation about how Do Not Pay is going to be actually litigating a case, a speeding ticket, obviously, but is going to be in court doing it. The follow up to last week's conversation is that Do Not Pay is putting money where their confidence is, and putting up $1 million to anyone willing to let their algorithm argue an upcoming Supreme Court case. It's a bold move. It, gets headlines. It's also probably fairly safe for them, as there's zero risk that the Supreme Court is going to let anyone do that.
Right. Exactly.
That said, some of the coverage did say that they thought they thought no party would let this happen because so many Supreme Court cases are such high stakes. And I was like, I don't know. I know of Supreme Court cases that are like pro se person complaining about their taxes. Like sometimes that gets all the way up there. That's the sort of, so there are cases that reach the Supreme Court that I could see the litigant actually believing in this, but the Supreme Court itself won't.
Well, there's the little issue of the fact.
It's illegal, isn't it, to take devices into court? Yeah, so I think that the way that I wrote,
you can't even bring an iPhone into a federal court.
No. So I said that actually he kind of got a little bit of the Twitterati tore into him, including Bob. I saw you commented saying that you wouldn't be allowed to take a device into the Supreme Court. There was tons of backlash against him sort of, but I thought it was really funny. I mean, I'll
give you $1 million to do something you can't do.
Yeah, you can take you can get waivers to bring things in, and theoretically this would be one of those situations. But yes, it's not going to happen. For instance, I always was able to take an iPhone into the Southern District because I had a letter from Sonia Sotomayor when she was on the Second Circuit saying, but it wasn't my doing. I'm not that close with her, but the partner of my law firm was, and he had gotten us all letters like, these people get to bring their phones in, leave them alone. So I always was able to do it. So you can, that is possible.
Wouldn't it be malpractice if a lawyer bit and agreed to do that? I mean, it's one thing if a pro se litigant agrees to, but I think if a lawyer did, it'd be outright
also selling the outcome of your case for $1 million seems like questionable ethics to me.
Yeah, that alone. Let alone letting the AI tell you what to say.
Well, I mean, but okay. Well, let me game this out. How different is that than saying that is saying who you're hiring? You're putting the stakes of the case on somebody else. I don't know.
All of the.
I mean, neither's Jay Sekulow, but we let him argue tons of cases before the Supreme Court, depending on how you define lawyer. And I define it with somebody who's competent. So I don't necessarily know about the malpractice-y angle of it. Plus, it's also fair to say they do sometimes allow amicus to give some conversation about what's going on in the amicus brief. Then how much is that malpractice if you're having a friend of the court give some conversation? Like, I don't know as though that's malpractice at all. Do you actually have an obligation on an amicus? Like, really? That's an interesting That's an interesting question that I don't know legal ethics wise, but can you violate some obligation to somebody who's
Amicus
not
don't
a
get
party?
oral argument though, do they?
I mean, sometimes they do. Like, well, I mean, usually it's just the U.S. government, but I mean, theoretically, they could give it to other people. But there are tons of cases at the Supreme Court where the federal government is not a party, and they let the Solicitor General talk.
Yeah, yeah.
But I mean, even if pretend the hypothetical where you could get this device in and they could, no judge was going to allow this. I mean, I actually had a long conversation with Judge Schlegel about this, who is one of the more technologically advanced judges. And he was he was like, not in a million years, I would never let this happen in my courtroom.
But someone just pointed out that GPT is probably not up to it. I mean, I know that you know, but yeah, I mean, for that was just one of many reasons why they wouldn't probably allow it.
But lawyers already bring technology into court with AI that they're asking questions of and retrieving information. The judge isn't expecting every time a lawyer enters something into a keyboard to see how much of that it came from the computer and how much came from your brain.
But I think the fact that this would all come, this would all come from GPT, right? The idea, and this is what's happening in the traffic case. I actually think the more interesting thing is this traffic case that they're going to have next month, where they haven't disclosed the name of the court or defendant, but someone has agreed to have the headphones in and say exactly what GPT tells them.
In a Zoom hearing, I think in a Zoom hearing, though, right?
Is it online?
Is that what they said they're going to do? A Zoom hearing?
I
thought it was in person. But also the issue with that is that the article I read is that they're doing it to some unwitting judge. Like, that seems like a prank to pull on a judge. Like,
right.
That seems like
this is why Google pulled their chat, the assistant thing that would call restaurants and make reservations for you, but the person taking the reservations didn't know they were talking to a computer. You know, the one that would say, yes, can you? And they pulled it because that was sort of disingenuous and people didn't like being faked out by AI. In this case, you're talking about a lawyer making a legal argument that's being dictated to by an AI. Doesn't even allow you to use discretion in terms of making the argument, at least along the terms that they've, the
way they laid it out, not at all.
No. And I think that's the difference to what Jean's saying. So Jean, I take your point about, people are using tech and they are using different systems now, but actually the difference is that it is dictating. There is no discretion, and you are being told, you are it's quite categorical that you're repeating what GPT tells you to say.
That's pretty terrifying.
Yeah.
So like part of the reason this operates mostly in the speeding ticket universe is this is a universe in which there's almost never representation. It is almost constantly pro se. Even like nobody, I mean, I know there are traffic ticket lawyers, but they're almost never hired, right?
I hired one once.
Fair enough. All right. So maybe in super complex cases, perhaps, but speeding, probably not it. Which brings me to, and that's my issue. And like when folks say, well, there's never a million years I'd let this happen. It's like, so instead you want some like defenseless, non-legally trained pro se to just like pop off in your court about how it's a maritime court and the aliens that wrote the Declaration of Independence. Like, so many crazy people go in on the pro se side. Why not let a bot tell them, no, that's not what the law says?
So would it make any difference if the bot had passed the bar exam? Because
what a segue!
Good segue.
Whoa. You are on fire! Fire today, Bob.
Bob is Jordan Game 6 right here with his segues. It's just like one after another.
Yeah, so there was the story. We actually did allude to it a couple of weeks ago, I think, I'm told, but we didn't really get into it. But there was this story, and I had it on my podcast this week, of GPT 3.5 taking the bar exam. Dan Katz and Michael Bomarito, who are both scientists and scholars and lawyers, sat down pretty much over the Christmas break and pulled together a whole bunch of the multi-state bar exam questions and basically just had gave GPT prompts based on answering these bar questions and tested it in couple of different ways in terms of how they gave the prompts to it and all of that. But they reported, and these are people who have worked in the field of computational law for, I don't know, 20 years or so, a long time. They were amazed by the results. It didn't actually pass the bar exam, but it did pass what I think it was evidence in civil procedure or evidence in tort, something like that, and did pretty well on some of the other ones. And the significant thing here in part is that this was completely untrained. I mean, this is just took GPTs, trained on the large language model without any legal specific training. And there could be, we don't know, there could be legal training out there on the large language model, but just completely untrained how to take the bar exam. And so if you had fine-tuned it a little bit and trained it a little bit more on legal stuff, it probably would have passed. GPT-4, whenever that's going to come out, is probably going to pass. Again, their point about this is not, it's sort of fun to think about it taking the bar exam, but the real question here that they were exploring was how well can GPT just kind of understand legal concepts and legal language, because if it can do it on the bar exam, it can probably do it in a whole bunch of other contexts as well. So it really does open up a question, well, A, what the heck is the bar exam all about? But B, what does this mean for the future of GPT in terms of the practice of law and what it can do? And we've talked about it last week. We talked about it a couple of times, but I think we really are on the verge of dramatic developments in this area.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting, Bob, that they did this with the earlier version of GPT, and it didn't do any place close to as well as it did this time, which would suggest that the next iteration may pass all portions of it. But I was like you. I mean, I sort of made me think, well, what is it we're really trying to prove or establish with the bar exam when you can have, an artificial intelligence platform answer the questions as well as a lawyer can, or as well as a law student can? I mean, what's the point, I guess? It's bottom line of the bar exam when you have kind of
The
information
ritual.
available. Yeah, well, obviously that's probably it more than anything. But I mean, you would think that it should at least test the ability of people to analyze legal concepts and come up with solutions. And I think what it really tests is more memorization of arcane facts like the dead man statute and the rule against perpetuities, which I used like every day in my litigation practice for 30 years. It's very important to me. Whatever those concepts are, I can't remember now.
No,
it's fun at cocktail parties too.
Right.
Bob, you just raised case text, and I actually I was thinking the same thing. Case text, parallel search, and all search are actually very close to be able to do contextualized question and answer, and they can feed to a lawyer an outline for a motion. So I mean, it's not based on GPT chat technology. It's another kind of technology that has very advanced contextual, I don't know whether you want to say understanding, but where I see it could potentially go is raising the bar on what low-level work means. So could GDP chat do, say, a draft of, an interrogatory? Could it do the first draft of lots of things? So where it might take an associate a few hours to do it, it could be you give it a few facts and a jurisdiction, and it gives you some preliminary documents.
Absolutely. The starting point. I mean, because and I'll say this, having been a junior associate at a big law firm, it can probably do a first draft as well as, somebody walking in the first day. But that's the key. It has to be a first draft.
I mentioned before, I think I mentioned before that I spoke to the head of innovation at one of the big transatlantic firms a couple of weeks ago, who has been playing around with GPT-3 And she gave it a bunch of really high profile cases that we, you know, certainly in the UK, we would have all have studied, and that, you know, really sort of defining case law with very established legal principles, and it got it wrong. And in the first, she's been sort of continuing to play around with it, but it didn't get them right, and it didn't, you know, come back with the right facts. And then eventually, you know, she carried on feeding it more information, and then it did. But it's interesting. And I said, well, what are you you thinking of anything practical? And she said, absolutely not, not for the time being. You know, like I know that I'm not. You know, I'm not saying that it's not going to go that way, but I think right now people would be mad to rely on it. And I think it would take more work. You know, we were talking about the checking of the checking. I don't know. Are we going to check that the facts? I don't know. I think for the time being, it's just, from what I've heard, the people who are playing around with it. I mean, your bar exam example is really interesting, because obviously it nearly passed. So that's really interesting, Bob, because that's quite different to the experience of this innovation head that I was speaking to.
Well,
in Alabama, it probably did.
Bob alluded to this when he was talking about it, that, I mean, the differences between GPT-3 and 3.5 are huge. And the differences between 3.5 and when we get to 4 are going to be even huger. Yeah. So it's like, I mean, everyone I've been talking to about this, is they're like, this is nothing. It's going to blow your minds. And we're going to see it in like within 6 months.
Well, and you have to fine tune the technology too. It's not, this is right now it's being trained on like stuff off of Reddit and Wikipedia. And, you know, when you start actually training it against legal sources, it's going to perform much better on legal applications.
And when you can you can train it on your own, like within, like, say, you know, you have your own law firm, you can train it on your own, all of your internal stuff, and train the model that way to fine tune it to actually learn more of your voice and how you do it. And specifically, you know, if you're in a very niche area, learn the law that way.
Actually, I wished I'd interrupted you, Stephanie, because that's what I was going to say. I was actually thinking of, you know, as you, all of us have probably done in the past, you have a big complex case and you have to draft a statement of facts, and there could come a day where all of the depositions could be fed into a program like this, and it could spit out the first draft of a statement of facts with the citations and all of that in it, which, God, used to drive me crazy to try to draft all that and find, oh, I remember so-and-so said such and such, and they've got to find it. And you dig through, and it's so, yeah.
I think
what do a privilege log, because then I'm all for it.
I think what it's best for right now is honestly replacing Google search. And eventually it's going to be to the point where you can use it fairly confidently in for legal work. But right now with Google search, Google has turned into just a ridiculous, full of promoted crap and full of spam that you can't locate anything anymore. And I found that going to ChatGPT to look up a medical condition with my kid's knee to try and figure out maybe what it is, to find a recipe for just an authentic garlic sauce, rather than, you know, it provides so much more precise, useful information for that type of thing than Google search. And so Google is, and there's a reason this has become, I think they called it a red alarm at Google or something. As soon as it's out, they now have a whole team on it trying to compete with this, because they used to be that accurate, and now they're not anymore. And so I think ChatGPT is going to come out with a pro version. I just read that very soon. I'll pay for it in order to have better search than Google at this point, because I can't find anything online.
You know,
I had that exact conversation last night.
Unofficially, I had a conversation with somebody at one of the big tech research companies, and they said they couldn't afford to implement ChatGPT. So I don't know what it's going to cost at an enterprise level. But I sort of said, well, you know, like, maybe you're not going to be in business in 5 years. You know, it's like, if it explodes, I mean, how can the big companies not adopt it?
Right. I was going to say that I was solely tempted to, when I did my article on the Consumer Electronics Show, to ask, you know, GPT to write the introduction for me. So I figured they could probably talk about how many people were there and the square footage and all that jazz. And then I thought, it's more people are interested in that anyway, so I'll leave it alone.
I tried to use it the other day,
I
tried to use it the other day, and it was busy. It literally was. I was And then when because I was actually I was writing a comment, and just for a laugh, I keep putting stuff in it for fun. I was seeing whether he would do the better job. Not that I'm competitive.
I was.
And then it just went, oh, I'm busy. We're busy. We're at capacity. We'll message you when, and it hasn't. So I've had no message. So sad times.
But Niki, what you were saying, I had that exact conversation with someone last night about how Google gives you garbage now. It's either all YouTube videos or sponsored
spammy blog posts.
Yeah.
Well, part of that though is the problem with like fundamentally, and this is me. I'm going to be ranting old man for a second. Kids these days, I generally think the kids are all right, but one thing I think they're wrong about is they don't understand the concept of files anymore. They're used to the idea of I type something in and magic happens and then I get it. What they don't understand is that Google Magic was always because it was originally called backrub, right? The whole point of that technology was it went through the backlinks where the person who'd created whatever the website is had done some taxonomy work, where they'd done some work saying, oh, this is a this and this and that. People don't do that anymore because they don't think it's necessary. And therefore, Google kind of is a turtle flipped over on its shell. It's like going around trying to put things in the right place, and it doesn't. The kids aren't making that data anymore, which is a problem for them.
Well, everything's paid for and optimized. It's a problem.
Yeah.
But isn't it also that their pay model is that their advertising model is they want you floundering around and not getting directly to what you're looking for? And so if you get your answer first, you're off their website.
Right.
I'm not sure that's.
They work.
I'm not sure that's true.
They were our best. They were our best option, but yeah.
I'm not sure that's true. I think
you land on these blog posts that are full of subtitles of every question everybody asks. They don't even answer the question. They just create these SEO optimized posts that are full of nothing. And that's what you always land on first.
Right. Yes. Because the only people who are doing the good taxonomy at this point to game that system are the people who are trying to get you to some weird spam site. That is definitely true. And Google is definitely giving preferred ad space and whatever. Part of the problem is that, and I understand why people feel this way, but part of the problem is Google's gone to all this sponsored content and ad way because we're skeeved out by it, have been taking steps as a society to gut their actual money, which is your data. They don't care whether if you hit the first thing on their website, that's great. Back in the day, it was like, that's great. We don't want you on our website. We want to know that is exactly what you want so we can sell that to somebody who gets that data to somebody who can get you later. But we all were skeeved out by Google knowing everything about us. And now, here we are.
Well, they still know everything about us, and they're charging and making all this money is what I feel like. They got greedy, and they're evil. They're no longer doing no evil. They're full of evil. But I just wanted to mention, I would be derelict though if I didn't mention that I did use ChatGPT. I wanted to mention this really quickly to ask it who were the top legal tech influencers, just to see what it would say. And it gave, if you ran it 4 or 5 times, it gave a whole bunch of different fairly useful results that at least were a good starting point. But from there, I crowdsourced it and I created a list. And then I created a Google Doc because someone suggested it. I initially did this on LinkedIn, but I just wanted to share it in the comments because it did end up being a springboard to creating a pretty diverse list of diverse people. So
because she left everybody on the show off her list initially, but we won't mention that.
Do you see? Greg says, was it more than Bob this time? That's.
I'm sorry, Bob. I missed.
Don't rub it in.
I said Greg. Because you left off everybody on the show after the initial draft, or the GPT left everybody on the show off its list, so it was clearly.
Is that how this started? I was like, literally, this is rubbing salt in the wound.
It was you and I were on it, Bob. It didn't leave off.
Yeah, well, of course.
Of course we were.
Did you see the one I posted this morning? I asked it who were the top influencers or something like that, and it named several people that had their affiliations totally wrong. The names were fairly good, but they're it had one guy as the CEO of Casetext when he's not the CEO of John Albert, I think it was, and it was really kind of funny how it had the affiliations all screwed up. But all right, given so here's a stretch of a transition, I guess, because we were just talking about Google knowing everything about us and tracking everything about us, and that actually just came up in a conversation I had with a legal tech company this week, because there was this news of Dicta acquiring Gavelytics, and in talking to the CEO of Dicta yesterday, he said, well, it's sort of like how Google knows everything about us, we know everything about judges, and that's how we're able to apply these analytics. But I thought that was a kind of an interesting development. I don't know, Gene, I know you wrote about it a little bit, but it was kind of a come back from the ashes story for Gavelytics in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think at least I was incredibly sad, because I thought Gavelytics was like one of the first startups to really tackle state court analytics, which are a nightmare. And I think the good thing about startups is that they inspire everybody to get into the race. And so the other larger companies started paying more attention to state court analytics. But I thought, I have to say, I can't ever remember a time when a company came back after dying, which I thought was a great thing. It's like Gavelytics is back from the dead. And basically, Dicta said they were only focused on doing federal court analytics, and the Gavelytics data gives them a head start in taking on state courts. So, I'm all for it. I think it's great, but I thought it was hilarious. I looked at the LinkedIn profile for the owner of Dicta, and he's also the co-founder of a company that does cocktails in a bottle. So I was thinking he will have a really interesting hospitality suite when we get to a conference.
Joe, it sounds like we need to be friends with this guy, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is let me check the participants.
Yeah,
let me check the participants in this chat. Let's see who's.
I don't know if anyone.
He's a finalist in our Legal Week Awards, so I'll talk to him and see what I can do.
Excellent.
Dan Rabinowitz, is that the name? Yeah.
Dan Rabinowitz, yeah.
I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, he's a former lawyer. He's a former trial lawyer too.
Does anyone know about the terms? Because with the Gavelytics, what was I wrote about it too. But it was June last year when they sadly, Bob, right. I think everyone wrote about this. It was a long time ago that they sadly said that they were folding, right. And it's quite a long time afterwards to then, for this to emerge. And I started to get to thinking, and I don't know the answers yet, but about, does anyone know I wonder what the terms of the deal was in terms of the value, and how many people came on board. And, I need to do some more. I don't know, Bob, you had another conversation. You published another interview today, did you?
I did, yeah, today. But they did not talk anything about terms. It's interesting because there was a lot of, he did say, and as a matter of fact, I edited out a little bit on I did like a transcript of our conversation. I edited a little bit out but a couple of things he sort of said off the record. But there's a backstory, I think, here that we don't yet know about this whole thing, because he closed down so suddenly. It was like one day, he just notified everybody all of a sudden, and even the people who worked there were taken by surprise that this was happening. And then you kind of wondered at the time, like, why didn't he sell the assets? He had all this valuable data. Why would he just close down as opposed to sell what he had? So clearly that must have been his plan all along, not just the data, but the whole technology for scraping this data and keeping it up to date, which is probably maybe even more valuable than the data itself at this point.
Or they were already in talks. That's what I wonder, because I reached out to, oh God, I'm so bad with names, Rick. And he said to me, I'll get back to you. There's things going on. And right. I never heard back from him, but I sort of didn't want to, I felt like I don't want to force him to talk if he doesn't want to talk.
But then it's a funny announcement. It's a funny announcement. So my understanding said they couldn't get funding. So it reminds me a little bit of Wren and Court, I know it's completely different, but they couldn't get funding. But then if they were going to sell the asset, like, why wouldn't they downsize or get, or say we've got a plan or something, rather than just sort of saying, right, this is it, we're shut down. It seems an interesting approach. You can't get funding, so you say you're shut down, and then 6 months later you go, ta-da.
Yeah. The other funny thing is that they shut down, it was like on June 30th or something, and then Predicta launched on like July 2nd or something.
No, it was like
within,
literally the same day.
oh, was it the same day?
June 29th. Yeah.
Yeah.
One
I thought the
closed and the other open.
the interesting thing to me about the transaction is, Predicta has, at least they claim that they go about analyzing and predicting what judges will do differently than just looking at motions and what the judge has done in the courtroom, but looking at the judge's membership in clubs and relationships and attitudes and how they describe themselves. And so that could be how that could all shake out with state courts could be, I don't know, it could be a different tool than what we've seen in the past. And it's the state court data is the holy grail because most of the litigation is in state courts. So
yeah, I mean, I also wonder, like, actually the kinds of data they were collecting, I'm not sure how much, maybe it has how do you weight it? That's the real thing. It's not just that you have data, you have to give different pieces of data different weights. And so how much weight are you going to give their, whether they're a member of the Rotary Club or something like that, because he's actually collecting personal information and then combining it with public court data.
Yeah, and there's with the federal court judges, there's more things that are public, not in public record, I guess. But I wondered about that whole plan when it was first when Dan first started talking about it. I know he had some statistics that he waved around, about how good it was and all of that. But
87.
I don't know. With state,
accurate.
Yeah.
I heard
With state court judges.
There's a professor called
state
Dr.
court
Hannah.
judges. Most of them are elected. So I guess you've got everything that they said to get themselves elected, but how valuable that is. As we have seen from recent politics, there are some people that will say anything to get themselves elected to positions like the House of Representatives speakership.
Yeah,
but
we talked about that in our
that
interview.
Only started this year, right?
But we talked about that in our interview because he said it's going to be, it's not just getting like the data from Gavelytics. They need to get all that other kind of data that they're using to help understand and predict behavior. And if it's an elected state, they can get it more easily than if it's a non-elected state.
It doesn't get it right. So this talk I heard by Dr. Hannah Fry at ILTA in London, she was talking about litigation analytics and automation and gave some amazing examples of how it just got it completely wrong. And she was saying, that we are sort of slightly blindly trusting these analytics, going, oh, hey, it's going to tell us about judge behavior and this behavior. She's saying, she was giving examples, to me, that's one of those interesting areas where we are really trusting the technology and people are making decisions on it. And actually she gave some examples. So she was like, hey, let's stop and have a think about this.
Yeah. I just wanted to go back to what Steve said a second ago. He made a snarky remark about the House of Representatives. And listen, I'm going to stand up for former NBA All-Star George Santos, whose resume is beyond reproach. Yeah. All right.
Did you see the New York? It was the New Yorker piece on George Santos applying for a job, but it was a letter. I forget what job he was applying
Amazing.
for. It's really funny. It's really funny.
No, but I put this. I put this in our insider chat, I guess. But did you get any food at ILTA London, or did they just not? It's a good question.
So I will have to say one reason that I do go to CES is they do give the media breakfast and lunch every day, and the media room is very close to everything that's going on.
We did get food. We did get food at ILTA. It was actually really nice. It was much, much smaller. And then there were drinks as well. Like there was like a whole, well, I suppose there's drinks in the US as well. But yeah, there was food.
Huh.
Right? What's up with that?
Yeah.
You see, you guys need to come to London.
So I'm trying to think of any good way to transition to a story about inadvertent disclosure or email ethics, or no, phone ethics. So I can't think of any good ways. So How about it? The inadvertent disclosure story. Like, always like a good tech incompetence story, Stephanie.
Yeah, it's a running theme, right? I'm either talking about AI or tech incompetence. Like, again, social security numbers of high profile people that visited the White House just not redacted and out there from the January 6th committee. I mean, and that's, I mean, when we talked to them, like, how many of these mistakes are there going to be? Who's QCing this stuff? How does this keep happening? It seems like the most basic things that people are getting wrong.
Was that in? How did they get out there?
It was, I have to remember now. I've read so many articles today.
Well, is it because people assume computers can read and they're not bothering to learn to read anymore?
Right.
We're already relying too much on the computers, even though we can't trust them. The output's horrible. And here we are, we're stuck at this point.
I mean, it was just part of the committee just released a bunch of records, and just in it was stuff they didn't redact. Like, it wasn't a leak, it wasn't anything. They just were like, we're releasing stuff as we do, and oops, here's a bunch of social security numbers.
Your story, Cassandra's story, says records released. A January 6th committee aide told the Washington Post records released publicly underwent a review process to redact personal details and other sensitive information. Yep.
Yeah, like, they did it, but they just didn't do it right. Like, it's just, there's not much to the story other than someone messed up yet again.
Since I was traveling, I wasn't able to read this beforehand. Was it the classic, they redacted it, but anybody who copies and pastes it into a new document, it shows up? Or was it just not redacted at all? Because that's the usual situation. I remember back in the day where it shows up with all the black marks, and then you just go, as a journalist, I think we've all done this, let's just see, copy it, paste it into Word, and everything's there.
But here's what the article says. While the social security numbers were redacted from the Excel spreadsheet before it was made public, those under a different tab were left untouched.
Yeah. It was just a manual process, and they just didn't do one of the tabs.
No one understands Excel. I mean, I think that's fair. Just no one understands spreadsheets.
Right.
It's a good excuse. Yeah. Who knows what it is?
Pivot tables are a whole other level of tech competence.
I mean, you can't even print the things out, for God's sake.
My biggest horror story from Big Law, which I won't get into, involves having to print out the world's largest Excel spreadsheet and spend all night taping it together.
Yeah.
Was that one of those classic where a partner's like, whatever it is, I just want it in a binder, and you're like, well, it's 48 binders, so here we go.
100% it was that. It was only one binder, but the one spreadsheet was 9 pages wide, so I had to tape them all together and accordion fold it into a binder and 3-hole punch it, just in case.
I don't know if they still do it, but back in the 90s even, the Oxford English Dictionary would print things. It would still be this big, but it would be such small print that it would come with a glass, like a magnified glass.
Yeah. I just read something. It was like malicious compliance where a boss wanted an MP3 printed out. And so the person did a screenshot of every single, like, here you go. Here's like 500 stacks of screenshots. Because they insisted they wanted the MP3 file printed. So.
All right. Well, maybe we have a quick time for mobile sharing phone contacts via mobile apps. Ethics of that, Niki.
I can go through that super quickly. So I wrote about this a couple of weeks ago, and then I wrote about it again, but I haven't republished my blog yet. Pennsylvania looked at this, as did New York, and they came to slightly different conclusions, but similar conclusions. Essentially, it's this idea that lawyers have contact information on their app, on their phones, and both Pennsylvania and New York consider the issue of sharing contact information with apps and what are lawyers' obligations. Every time you download an app, you just click agree, right? Like, we all just click agree, because who's going to read through that? And, what are your obligations in that situation? And essentially, New York said they defined it as client confidentiality, and you need to take steps to preserve client confidentiality. And then Pennsylvania broadened it and said they agree with the conclusion, except that their description or their definition of, because of their rules of professional responsibility, defines it as information relating to representation of a client. So not just confidential client information, but information relating to representation of a client across the board. And they both said that that if your smartphone has information of either of those types, confidential client information or information relating to a client, depending on which jurisdiction you're talking about, then the lawyer may not consent to share the information with a smartphone app unless the lawyer concludes that no human being will view that information, that the information will not be sold or transferred to additional third parties without the client's consent. So I think what that essentially means is when you're downloading an app for $1, you paid $1 for the app, there is no way that you have the incentive to call the vendor or even the ability to call the vendor and vet the vendor. So I think it basically precludes lawyers, at least in those jurisdictions, from using the vast majority of apps. When you're purchasing software, it's a significant investment. And of course, you're going to get them on the phone, and you're going to be able to get them on the phone to ask them all those questions about how they're going to handle the client data. You're not going to be able to do that with apps. So I think that going forward, lawyers are going to have to be really careful about the data they keep on their phones and whether they have a personal phone and a professional phone, which sounds like a pain in the butt. But you may have to start doing that, or else not have any apps on your phone, or have no client data whatsoever on your phone. It's worth thinking about as we move forward.
Several years ago, and I've not followed up with it because I'm very bad at my job. But several years ago, I remember meeting with BlackBerry long after we all stopped using BlackBerries. And BlackBerry I was like, so how am I not having a meeting with WordPerfect right now? And they explained that what they'd moved into was basically an app on your phone that you would open, and all your client contacts and everything, it basically created a mirrored phone that was shielded, where you could have all the client conversations and contacts and texts and all that sort of conversation, but it wasn't your real phone. So when on your real life you said, oh, I use an app and I share my data, it was all sheltered. And I was like, that's a smart move. I don't know if that's how if they managed to keep going with that, or everyone else figured it out too, or whatever. But I was like, oh, that's a smart way to keep going.
Can't you segregate your contacts? I mean, if you're using, say, MyCase, that's a practice management program I've heard of. And don't you have an app that you can just have your MyCase contacts in the app as opposed to in your phone contacts section? And then you're not going to be sharing.
I think with MyCase and most practice management software tools, you keep your data in the tool. And that's why, for example, MyCase has built-in texting. And other providers in the legal.
That's what I'm saying. If you're using MyCase on your iPhone, you don't need to have your client contacts in your iPhone contacts. You can just go to your MyCase app or Clio app or whatever it might be.
Right.
And,
so you can
get around that issue.
Data segregated in the, secure encrypted platform that you're using and paying for. And I think that that's a good point. Moving forward, maybe that's what lawyers are going to have to do. They're all going to have to use law practice management software. So it's unfortunate, but.
Put in a plug for you there. Caroline, you stayed up late and I didn't get a chance to call on you, but I don't know if you.
I was just laughing at I keep my contacts taped to my monitor on a post-it note in the chat. I think it's been fun. We've got through some stuff.
All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for this week. We're out of time, but hopefully we'll be back next week. We all survived the Friday the 13th edition of this show, thankfully, and see you all next week. Thanks for attending.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.